Hey guys, Ricky Widmer here from Most Valuable Podcast. You're about to listen to a little bit of our primetime podcast that we recorded this week. Make sure to go to Blog Talk Radio / Most Valuable Podcast for our full-length podcast that you can go ahead and download. I hope you enjoy it. I know me and Brandon did recording it. But Brandon, we got to end the podcast with our last segment. We are doing our, it's now become an annual thing. We're doing NFL draft topics, kind of getting set up for the season, talking about some guys that we're obviously going to pay attention to this season when it comes to the NFL draft. We've done it for Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, talked about Luke Falk. Last week, I had the honor of looking at Arden Key. Could he be the best defensive player in the draft and this season in college football this upcoming year? Today, we're going back to the offensive side of the ball as we usually do. And the reason why is we're going to talk about Calvin Ridley. And because the NFL.com analyst and former NFL scout, Bucky Brooks, has compared Ridley to former NFL great Reggie Wayne, saying based on his size and his playing style that he is like Reggie Wayne. And the exact quote, and I'll read a little bit of it, is Ridley's smooth route running skills and spectacular ball skills make him tough to defend on the perimeter, particularly when he has free access at the line. And last year, his stats were the just under 2,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, 30 career games. He also said they're smooth route runners with speed and quickness, and they have unique stop-start ability that's better than anyone that I've ever been around, end quote. Brandon, you are the Alabama guy. They are one of your teams for college football, that is, Notre Dame being the other one. I'll ask you, what do you think of this comparison? Could Calvin Ridley be the next Reggie Wayne at the next level?
See, I think it's an interesting comparison, but I think when I think of Calvin Ridley, you know who I think of? Is I think of Julian Edelman.
I'll take it.
I think of Julian Edelman because you talk about a guy who's really, really good in route running, a guy who's really, really good with his ball skills. That, to me, screams Julian Edelman. Now, Edelman's a little smaller in terms of his height. He's 5'11", but 5'10", 5'11", but he's 10 pounds heavier at 198. So I really do look at him as being more of a Julian Edelman, a guy who's real quick, who really has some good route running, and I that's how I would compare him. I think that Reggie Wayne, I guess I just think Reggie Wayne, whoa. I mean, I don't want to make that huge comparison because it's nowhere near someone comparing someone else to Tom Brady. But at the same time, Reggie Wayne was one of the greats at the wide receiver position. Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne, those two guys back to back on that Colts team when it was Peyton Manning. Oh my gosh, that was awesome. And then you had Dallas Clark, Dally, as Peyton would call him.
I was going to mention Dallas Clark. He was there too.
That was great. So I don't want to get too far ahead of oneself saying Calvin Ridley is similar, comparable to Reggie Wayne. I think that it certainly goes to show how other people are viewing Calvin Ridley. He's very good. He's very talented. And I think that if you get him and then Jalen on a little bit more of a same page, I think that air attack for Alabama can be very, very good. But I think that when you take a look and you see that he's got 161 catches for over 1,800 yards and 14 touchdowns in his 30-game career, I think that you'd certainly look at Ridley as a guy who I use certainly way too many times in that sentence. I certainly apologize. But a guy who absolutely will be a good player in the NFL. But I certainly, gosh damn it, I need to stop saying that. I definitely see him as a guy who can be like Julian Edelman. I'm going to shut up because if I don't,
Brandon
I will say...
certainly loves certainly.
I can't believe I said that many times. What the hell's wrong with me? Go ahead, Ricky.
Okay, I'm gonna steal what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to steal a bit from the Dan Patrick Show. We're not doing the stat of the day. We're doing stat of the podcast. And the stat of the podcast that I have for you is in the last two seasons, in his last two seasons, because that's what he's been there, he has accounted for 161 catches at Alabama. That is 28.4% of the total receptions in that span. So over a quarter of the receptions are going to Calvin Ridley. And that is with Jalen Hurts and another, like Jalen Hurts, it's not just him and Hurts. It was him and Hurts last year, and then the year before, I believe it was him and Coker that were there doing that. So he's done it with 2 quarterbacks. He's going to get that now with Jalen Hurts, a second year. The thing that I loved was when I looked at Todd McShay's way too early mock draft, I had a smile on my face because not only is Calvin Ridley a top 5 pick, that's not why I had the smile on my face. Who did he have Calvin Ridley going to at the 5th overall pick? But my Purple People Eaters. I looked at that pick and went, please, unless it's like we're getting like a Josh Allen or a Sam Darnold or a Lamar Jackson, give me Calvin Ridley. Give me a wide receiver that the thing that Calvin Ridley to me is going to be when he gets to the NFL, when he goes to the draft, is if you are taking him in the first round, he can be your number 1 day 1. He can step in and I would be confident with him being my number 1, even as a rookie. And the reason being is route running is so huge when you get to the NFL. I don't need you to be the type of wide receiver that Odell Beckham is. I don't need you making spectacular catches over your head. If you can run the routes, learn the routes, and be able to be on the field and use your speed and quickness and that stop-start ability to run the routes and get the defensive backs out of position, I will take that. And the one thing that I wonder with Calvin Ridley is he going to be one of those guys that's also drafted by a team where it's like, hey, we don't need you to be the number 1. You can be the number 2, maybe even put you in the slot, and we can use your route running ability in that way too. That to me is the biggest thing I see in Ridley's game though, route running, and it's going to be huge. I loved your kind of analogy of Julian Edelman, another one that you mentioned, even in the Thad Motti. You're like, well, I'm going to make this analogy, but I don't know if it fits. Yeah, the heights are off. Julian Edelman's a lot shorter, but Calvin Ridley, why is Julian Edelman so successful? Because he is a great route runner. I mean, yeah, he is the best quarterback and the greatest quarterback of all time throwing to him, but he's a great route runner and has perfected that skill in the NFL.
But I think it's about also not just the route running, but if you look for a guy who you want to move the chains with, which is where Alabama looks for Calvin Ridley. That's where the Patriots are always looking for Julian Edelman. Whenever there's a third down and long, third down and short, and Tom Brady's throwing, who's he looking for? You know who he's looking for? Julian Edelman. Because Edelman is the guy to catch it and boom, he's I won't say he's gone all the time, a lot of time, but he is off. He's got the first down. He's got about 20 more too. That's what makes Julian Edelman so special. That's what makes Calvin Ridley so special. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see Ridley as a 1. I don't see him as an NFL number 1. And the reason being, nothing else.
At all?
Not on most teams.
Okay.
Like I'm going through here trying to look at all these different wide receivers. And what I feel like with so many of these wide receivers, they're 6'4", they're 6'5", they're 6'6".
So you're saying because he's smaller.
Huge targets. He's gonna be on a team, I feel like, that already has their number 1 at the 6'5" stature. But they need a solid number 2 or even a 1B. That's where I see him. Not because he's not good, but because I feel like the NFL is so... At the wide receiver position, they thrive on height. A quarterback who can throw it up and his wide receiver goes and gets it. And I think that you take a look at Ridley, his game, what he brings to the table. I'm not saying that every single one of them is going to be one of those bubble screens, but at the same time, I see a guy who's going to go more 10 yards out, come back 8. They throw it to him 8 yards, and then he's got a lot of yards after the catch. A lot of yaks. And I think that that's where I see Ridley thriving. That's where I see him thriving.
Well, and I'm glad that you say that. And the reason being is I'm looking at my way too early mock draft, which right now I'm just finishing up putting up the just kind of descriptions for each player as I have all the picks labeled out, but I am willing to tell you guys these things because I'm behind the 8 ball when it comes to this way too early mock draft. Is Todd McShay had him going 5 to the Vikings, and I'm using the same order that McShay did use. My difference is I had 4 quarterbacks going in the top 5. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but there were 4 teams that I could see needing quarterbacks there. Now, where do I have Calvin Ridley going? After the top 5, Denver, no, linebacker. The Colts, no, running back. The Bills, we're going to go with a safety. However, number 9, the New Orleans Saints. They're a team that specifically has what you mentioned. He might not be exactly 6'5", but they already have a guy in Michael Thomas who is 6'3", 212 pounds, can be that number 1 guy. And then if they draft a Calvin Ridley, he can be maybe the 2 or the 3. Where, I mean, it depends on what Ted Ginn is going to do. I mean, he's smaller than Calvin Ridley, so I would put Ridley above Ted Ginn Jr., but you could have, Michael Thomas there, then we have Calvin Ridley as the 2 on the other side, and then Willie Snead is, boom, right there in the slot. And you got a quarterback like Drew Brees, he'll find you. He will find you, whether it's 3rd and long, 3rd and short, 3rd and medium, 1st and this, 2nd and that. He will find you. He doesn't even care what your name is. He's going to throw you the ball.
I agree with you. I think that's a really good thought there because New Orleans, they just got a guy in Ted Ginn, and Ted Ginn is a guy streaking down the field, but I think that...
Unless he drops it.
When he drops it, asshole. That guy cost me some fantasy wins last year.
I digress, but I told Mark, the game that still sits in my head is, I want to say it was the Colts and the Panthers. Cam Newton hit him on a wide open, just streak down the middle of the field. Would have caught it, would have been an easy touchdown. Catch it the 5, walk right in, right between his hands.
Well,
right between his hands, but I digress.
It's funny. Well, no, we're going to continue to digress just for a second here because I remember that game and I needed him to drop that. He did, thank goodness, for me on that one. But then the one that really the one that sticks in my craw is the one that they played in a meaningless Monday night game against Washington this past year. I sat in your basement. We were watching the game. And I ended up losing by 0.4 points.
Because Jonathan Stewart. Points.
But if Ted Ginn would have caught one of the balls he dropped,
you would have won.
I would have won. So screw him. But I think
back to Ridley.
they've got Ted Ginn now, a guy who's streaking down the field. You need a guy like Ridley who's can he do it? Yeah, he can. But I still continue to look at him as a guy who you throw it to him at 5 yards and he'll get you 15. I think that's the guy that you've got with Ridley, and he can be so much better than what he is, and he's good. He's really, really good. I am interested and excited as to what he'll be able to do with an NFL team because he has been so good at Alabama, and this is a guy who can really make a difference on a team. And whatever team gets him, they're getting a really good talent.
Well, and I want to ask you this, because Todd McShay, way too early now, had him as a top 5. I got him as a top 10. I want to ask you, the Alabama guy, there's no one in this room between me and you that knows Calvin Ridley more than you. You being the Alabama fan more so than I am. I want you to give me the odds. First, give me the odds that when we get to the 2018 draft, that Calvin Ridley is a top 5 pick, and then give me the odds that he's a top 10 pick.
Odds that he is a
percentage, like 50% chance.
I'll go percentage. The odds that he is a top 5, 70. Odds that he is top 10, 100.
He's definitely going to be taken to the top. That's with top 10. There's no way that he comes out of the top 10.
And reason I say top 5 is because right now I really can't think of the other wide receivers that are going to be coming out in that draft, and because so much happens, so much changes. So I give it 70.
Really, the top wide receivers right now and this is going off of McShay's, is the next wide receiver he had was at 13, Christian Kirk from Texas A&M. This will be a big year for Kirk. And then the other wide receiver he has is Antonio Callaway out of Florida, who just possibly could get a big quarterback we talked about earlier, now throwing to him. He's at 21, going to the Ravens, and then Cortland Sutton from SMU going to the Falcons later on. And after that, that's Deion Kane from Clemson are the only wide receivers that McShay has going.
So honestly, out of all those guys, Ridley probably would sit at my 2. Callaway, I probably would put at number 1. I really like him.
You put Callaway over Ridley?
I really like him.
Because Todd McShay has Ridley as the number 1 wide receiver. I find that interesting.
Well, let me say this, is that they could probably be interchangeable, but I very much like Callaway.
And maybe Callaway might be someone we got to look at in a future podcast.
I think you might be right there. I've always liked Callaway when he's been with Florida. He's been a fun player to watch. That doesn't mean that Ridley hasn't. He's been awesome. But I'm just saying, too, is I got to give love to another SEC guy, of course. But I think that Ridley is so talented. He's so good. And he's going to bring a whole heck of a lot to whatever team that he's with. But hopefully he continues to bring a whole heck of a lot to the team he's currently with, Alabama.
And the thing when it comes to where he could be drafted, of course he's got to have a solid season this year. But just going off of last year, just to kind of wrap all this up into a nice shiny bow before we get to Brandon's final thoughts. When we look at last year, we had a top 5 wide receiver. I would put Calvin Ridley above him. We had Corey Davis at 5. Who went 7th? Mike Williams. And who went 9th? John Ross. So we had 3 wide receivers in the top 10, 1 in the top 5. I think if he has a phenomenal year this year, a solid year, he could be a top 5 talent in the draft. Brandon, before we move on and end the podcast, any final thoughts on Calvin Ridley and what he needs to do to up his draft stock? The final thoughts on the comparison for Reggie Wayne, just in general?
I think he just needs to continue to have another good season this year, and he is going to solidify himself as a top 2 wide receiver in the draft.
Well, this is where I turn the conversation on to you guys. Let us know down below in the description, what do you guys think Calvin Ridley? Could he be the next Reggie Wayne? And what does he need to do this season to up his draft stock? And where do you see him being drafted at the beginning of the college football season? Well, thank you guys for checking out this video from the Primetime Podcast. If you want to check out more, click right over here. The video's right over here. Check it out. Check it out. Check it out.